I think the term hacker started out in chess for some chess player who was enthusiastic but not very good.
Cambridge, Massachusetts, 1961. Hackers are invented at MIT.
It sort of evolved to mean somebody who was playing around with something like a computer or electronics, someone who wasn't focused on a nice, big, important project, but was just fiddling around.
A hacker may have been the ultimate weapon developed at MIT during the Cold War, and they completely lost control over it.
Early on, the Tech Model Railroad Club was a group of geeks at MIT. When they discovered computers, they became very interested in computers.
Hackers were as competitive and cocky as any other college student.
Everyone was an engineer or wanted to be one. People liked to speculate on how to solve problems and how to solve problems really well.
When a hacker dreams of another world, he is likely to make it real.
As an early geek, he was very involved in science fiction.
9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
I had a program that displayed two spaceships, and to make things interesting, they could fire torpedoes as well as accelerate, and the torpedoes would blow up torpedoes and other spaceships.
Immersing yourself in another world was the start of a long-lasting fascination.
If you can imagine an engineering student in the 60s going over to the engineering building in the middle of the night and confronting a magical display with moving objects and a game and being totally mesmerized, flabbergasted, enchanted. That was my experience with Steve Russell's Space War. I could not imagine a more compelling, wonderful game experience at that point in time, and it profoundly changed my life.
When fascination meets ambition, then comes the Silicon Valley archetype.
After I graduated from college, I determined that someday I was going to build a video game for the masses.
Young Bushnell instinctively felt there was something hot in this idea.
Nolan Bushnell was a young engineer from Utah, of the Mormon faith. When he was at University of Utah, he saw the first space war game on a PDP-1.
I didn't really pursue it commercially until after I graduated.
And he worked at a amusement park in Salt Lake City, so he understood coin-operated business.
Nolan Bushnell was not really a hacker, nor was he merely a dreamer.
He had salesmanship. He had charisma. He was tall and he was handsome and he was witty and he could talk 1,000,000 miles an hour.
The amusement park was not known as a place that paid a lot of money, but it was summer in Utah. Girls had come down there. It was a fun job. I became manager of the whole department.
Nolan Bushnell was from the very start someone hard to be put in a box.
My business mindset really came from a very young age, and it had to do with ham radio. I decided, literally at 10 years old, to make adult kinds of money.
Will this early inclination turn into a real business ability?
Nolan Bushnell was a visionary. Nolan Bushnell was somebody people want to line up and follow.
Business wasn't really his strength. Nolan Bushnell's strength was in recognizing something that is neat.
Nice.
Neat was his word.
That's good.
Who was Nolan Bushnell, according to himself?
I loved technology and things, but I also decided that I wanted to be popular. And so, for some reason, I always had an ability to sort of reinvent myself. I can remember the day I sold my ham radio transmitter to buy a pair of skis, which represented kind of a transition in mindset.
But Nolan Bushnell also was a conscious gambler.
I also learned how to spend a lot of money. For the first 3 years of college, when I do my budget, I would have poker winnings as a line item. The problem with being good at poker is that no matter how good you are, there's somebody out there that's better. I was better than all of my fraternity brothers, but I was not better than this one guy that came down and picked me cleaner than a Christmas goose.
By 1969, Nolan Bushnell looked like he had settled down.
You really learn how to be an engineer your first year on the job. Without that first year and a half at Ampex, I don't believe that my approach to the video game would have been at all the same.
Truth is that the gambler was waiting for another bet.
He actually formed a club inside of Ampex to invest in the stock market. Back in those days, individuals didn't invest in the market.
Establishing my own company and quitting was a whole different thing.
Al Alcorn entered Ampex at 19, while Nolan was enticing Ted Dabney into some venture of his.
Ted and I, who was my office mate at Ampex, were talking about this video game.
Making a coin-operated entertainment device using a computer.
Nolan was still so impressed by the Space War game that he copycatted it.
He had designed a game in his own time called Computer Space.
Ted said, sounds great, let's do it.
Nolan thought he was going to have one central computer and maybe run 10 or 20 games, but the economics didn't make sense. Even mini computers were too expensive.
His first and fairly academic approach wasn't sustainable at all.
He's decided he's going to try and find a way to make it something that could be marketable.
Displays at that time were $25,000. And I said, shucks, I can buy a consumer television set for $100.
Nolan discovered that computational sustainability was also an issue.
I was just doing this all on calculations and on paper. And I had to keep adding functionality to the hardware to relieve the burden on the mini computer. And finally I said, this computer is too slow. And then I had what they call the aha moment, where I said, get rid of the computer, I'll do it all in hardware. If you wanted an object on the screen, you had to put some chips into it.
Finally, Space War was going to be a viable arcade game.
Nolan Bushnell was obsessed with getting ahead in life. When he saw Computer Space, or Space War, he said, you know what, this is new, this is great. I see it before everyone else does. I'm going to ride this wave.
The money-making mindset of Mr. Bushnell started to work harder than ever.
We started the company with $250 each. Ted Dabney and myself. We chose Syzygy because we thought it was a cool name, and we pulled it right out of the dictionary. Syzygy means an alignment of planets in a solar system.
Even in those early days, Nolan was paving the way for one of the Silicon Valley evergreen.
He immediately evicts his daughter, Britta, from her bedroom, and that becomes his workshop. And cute little Britta gets to sleep in the living room.
I pitched it to Nutting Associates, who said, yeah, we'll put this into production, but also would you come and be our chief engineer?
People around him didn't get his new entrepreneurial style at first.
And about 1971, he resigned from Ampex to go work with a company called Nutting Associates. We felt sorry for him.
Computer space was the ultimate space-age thing.
He chose to use a fiberglass cabinet, very sculpted looking, at the time modern. Fortunately for Nolan, he never sold many of the computer spaces. You could only make one cabinet a day from a tool, from a mold. So it would be very hard to scale up.
But most of all, computer space was a great learning opportunity.
They put it in a bar called the Dutch Goose. It did okay because at the Dutch Goose you had geeks.
The early Space War game that ran on the PDP-1 was done for computer scientists, by computer scientists.
Could a game with such a steep learning curve be a national success?
Computer Space didn't succeed in retrospect because it was too complicated a game.
It took a special amount of knowledge of action and reaction and the way objects operate in free space, a little bit of knowledge of Newton's second law, things like that.
It was not a game for the average working class guy.
They just didn't know what was going on. And so it did extremely well around college campuses. It did no money at all in a working class neighborhood.
Computer space proved there was a market out there for video games.
People have said that Computer Space was a failure. It really wasn't. It did about $3 million in sales, which, not bad.
He immediately doesn't get along very well with his bosses there.
I thought that as I got to know Nutting, they were not a very clever company.
That became a pattern with Nolan. He was a great leader, maybe not as much of a follower.
Grew up in San Francisco. My neighbor, when we were living in the Haight-Ashbury, had a TV repair shop.
Al Alcorn was the result of putting a typical nerd in a hippie environment.
That's me.
I wound up at Cal, University of California, Berkeley, and that was during the 60s. I was very much involved in all of that stuff, too, in Berkeley.
Counterculture and technology were the explosive mixture that made Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley had started to build its reputation as a sort of center of good technology. And so I felt that it was important to kind of be at the hub of where things are happening.
Ampex, along with Hewlett-Packard and Fairchild, were the cradle of that new breed.
So in June of 1972, I was working at Ampex. It's where I met Nolan Bushnell and many of the people that became the core team of Atari.
I thought that he was a brilliant engineer and a really good technologist. And so he was my first choice for a hire.
Computer Space had made some money for Syzygy, but nowhere near Nolan's expectations.
The incompetence of Nutting gave me the encouragement to say, hey, I couldn't mess it up more than these bozos. Syzygy was already in use, so we had to choose another name, and we chose Atari.
Nolan Bushnell, the Silicon Valley entrepreneur, went for his first hiring.
He offered me a $1,000 a month salary, which was less than I was making at Ampex, and he offered me stock in the company, which I considered to be worthless.
What was convincing Alcorn was the new company spirit.
We were young, and we had an attitude that, hey, if we took this chance, it would be fun.
Nolan's gut was telling him they were going to be big.
Nolan kept telling me, oh, we're going to be $1 million company. I thought he was crazy. It would fail in a year or two. I'd go back to Ampex, and everything would be fine, and I'd actually learn a lot.
A new kind of workplace was taking shape, a kind which was going to be very popular.
At Ampex, you showed up at 8 o'clock in the morning, you left at 5 o'clock in the evening, you had a 1-hour lunch. You didn't wear blue jeans, you dressed in slacks and a white shirt, maybe a tie, maybe you wore a lab coat. You stayed there your whole life, and you got a gold watch, and you got retirement and a pension. I was from Berkeley.
It was pretty clear what was going on, at least in Nolan's mind.
We decided that we were going to have a new age company, a company of the age of Aquarius, where employees were going to be treated as human beings, and that we were going to be focused on results, not process.
We're going to build a product, and the product will speak for itself.
We had a very, very flat organization structure way before it was fashionable.
Today, everybody wants to start a company, but back then, that just wasn't done.
Ralph Baer is a fascinating man, largely self-educated, but with some education in radio technology, and became the quintessential inventor.
Ralph Baer had nothing to do with the age of Aquarius.
I had the initial concept of doing something interactive. It was just a matter of putting patterns up there, manipulating patterns, moving them around.
In 1966, he was heading 500 people at Sanders, a giant military contractor.
One day he's in a bus station and he sees a TV and he thinks, oh my gosh, what can you do with a TV besides just watch lame shows on it?
I wrote a 4-page paper on September 1st of 66 that lays it all out. It describes lots of different games and the interaction between the game and the television set and some of the technology.
Here's my partner, Bill.
He had no issue in putting someone on the job.
I took a technician, put him in a separate room, and let him work on something. Basically, I was asked questions like, are you still screwing around with this stuff? Right?
Oh, I'm glad you know how to count.
That's the kind of support I got.
The hardest task was finding a manufacturer to sell this idea to.
RCA, GE, Motorola, Magnavox, many others producing television sets. And they all said it was great, and except nobody did anything, except Magnavox. Out of that came the Magnavox Odyssey game, which first came out and was sold publicly in May of 1972.
Odyssey came out in the same days in which Al Alcorn was stepping in.
We had gotten a contract with Bally Manufacturing to build a driving game. But I felt that that was too difficult of a problem to have Al start to work on. Somebody had said, there's a video game being shown in Burlingame. And I thought, oh boy, I've got competition. Video game business was ours.
There's a lot of controversy over who was the real father of Pong.
I went into the Magnavox demonstration lab, and there was Odyssey.
I'll show you.
I said, well, there's no competition here. And so I went back, and that was actually the first day that Al Alcorn showed up.
Pay attention.
While staring at Odyssey, Nolan started to frame some basic aspects of video gaming.
The striking of the ball had no offensive aspect to it. It was simply blocking it, which is ultimately boring.
Well, it's not that fast.
The motion in general was not crisp. There was no sound. There was no score. I said, you know, if I were going to do a game like that, this is how I'd do it.
Eventually, Nolan showed another key element of the Silicon Valley way, ruthlessness.
People say, oh, I shouldn't do that because somebody else may have patented it or something. Unless you're directly stealing somebody else's concept, go for it and resolve it later. And that's what we did.
The gentleman's disagreement that started with Pong had grown to include the very concept of the video game.
It was a totally different architecture, different approach. The only similarity, it was a moving spot on a cathode ray tube.
Whether video games produced technically by one form of technology or another is totally irrelevant. There's no question that I'm the original inventor of home games. The record is clear. You know, there's the 4-page document. On the other hand, Bushnell and Associates, like Alan Alcorn, Ted Dabney, Steve Bristow, and others, were basically inspired by Nolan to do what? To put a coin slot on the space war game.
Bushnell tends to see the broader picture.
It's the one that really made it happen. The reality is that Pong was successful and Odyssey wasn't. Willie Higginbotham did a ping pong type game in 1958, and there were all kinds of ping pong games on the computer and PDP-1 in the middle 60s. So, you know, come on. It's silly.
What assures that Mr. Bear patented his ideas and Mr. Bushnell did not for a long time?
The problem is that Ralph, despite all of his many strengths, really didn't have a concept on how to make things fun.
Okay, who else would like to play?
The Odyssey sucked as a game console.
By 1973, Nolan Bushnell's mindset was prevailing over any competition.
I think my games were very, very good. They were cheap enough, and they were commercial. And I think I'm the commercial daddy.
It really wasn't until Atari came around that even ping pong became fun.
C'est la vie.
When Nolan hired me to design the next video game, apparently he wanted me to get practice. He thought of the very simplest game he could think of, which became Pong, which was one object moving, 2 score digits, and some sound. Couldn't be any simpler.
I did not think it was marketable. The arcades at the time, it was all about flying or driving or shooting.
Being the role model for many Silicon Valley entrepreneurs to come, Nolan manipulated his first employee.
Oh, I told him that we were trying for a contract with General Electric.
He told me that he had a contract for a home game. The fact that nobody from General Electric ever called or came by or wrote a letter didn't occur to me.
Al Alcorn proved sufficiently smart.
It took Al less than a week to get the Pong game going. He basically took a basic computer space set of circuitries for the sink and everything like that.
Frankly, it was kind of a failure. I had 75 chips in this thing, and it couldn't really exist more than 10 chips to be a home product. But Nolan didn't tell me he was going to throw it away.
The most notable feature in the game was that it was challenging.
Alcorn segmented the paddle, and depending on which part of the paddle hit the ball would go in different directions.
Well, you have the highest risk of missing the ball, and yet it's the most effective shot back. That's probably the one characteristic that really, really made Pong a commercially successful product.
They were shaping the paradigm of the perfect gameplay.
The other things that we did to make Pong a good game was speed up after a number of volleys. The game got harder as you played longer. It got very, very hard to play.
The sound discussion showed how an Age of Aquarius company solves important issues.
There was no sound. And then Nolan said, well, it's got to have sound. I said, really? What kind of sound do you want? And he said, well, I'd like the sound of a crowd cheering when you get a point. I didn't know how to do that.
Horizontal management brings along the risk of getting backtalk.
It took, I think, about 1.5 chips to do all that sound. Nolan, he didn't like it, but I said, well, if you want to change it, you go do it. I'm not going to do it.
Once Pong arrived, it seemed to be reasonable to test it on the ground.
Ted Dabney built a cabinet for this prototype over the weekend. It only said the word Pong on it. There were no instructions. There was a coin box, a television set, the name Pong, and 2 controls. And we put it in the Andy Capp's Tavern in Sunnyvale. Nolan and I had a beer and watched it. Somebody came over and played it.
Approaching the game seemed to be very simple to the people around it.
And Nolan asked this guy, how did you like it? And he says, oh, I know all about it. I know the guys who invented this thing. And so we saved the bullshit for the girls.
Nolan immediately left for Chicago, which was the amusement capital of the world at the time.
Nolan thought he could sell the idea to Bally, which was a big name in the arcade business.
And Al gets a call in the middle of the night from the manager at Andy Capp's Tavern who says, your machine's broken. Can you come fix it? Turns out it was so stuffed full of quarters, no one could get any more money in.
The coin box was filled with quarters, absolutely filled with quarters. And I put them in my pockets. I said, gee, if that ever happens, again, you give me a call, I can fix that.
People's behavior around Pong was changing rapidly.
The barkeep said the most important thing, and this is the key. This is the real key. He said, it's the strangest thing. I've never seen this before. This morning I came to open the bar, and there were people waiting outside, and they didn't order drinks. They came to play that game.
And I told Nolan what had happened. Nolan said, very interesting, very interesting.
Suddenly, Nolan changed his mind and wanted to keep the game for himself. The company business model had to change accordingly.
When we started Atari, the business plan was to do consulting engineering. We wouldn't be involved with manufacturing or sales or any of that stuff.
Building prototypes is one thing, manufacturing is a wholly different thing.
Atari was started in a little shop in Santa Clara on Scott Boulevard. I had a little lab where I did my engineering, and we manufactured right there. We had no money to fund any of this and no space. I come home and tell my wife, Nolan's crazy. He wants to build 100 Pongs a day. He's insane. But we did. Within 2 years, we became bigger than Bally.
Nolan and his associates had the chance to speculate about Pong's success.
The instructions were avoid missing ball for high score. You know, you didn't have to worry about this button gives you thrust and this button fires and this button does this and that button does that.
It didn't have a lot of naked ladies on it. It was very appealing to women and men. And the other very important thing, it was 25 cents a play.
Video games were new and were about to change the arcade's environment for a long time.
Andy Capp's Tavern is one of those bars where you eat your peanuts and spit the shells on the ground. A lot of these games were going into bars where people had 6 beers. We're not kid-friendly places.
Video games appealed to kids and to the nerdy ones more than anyone else.
I saw this game and I said, oh my God, you can make a game on a television set. Who would have ever thought of that? Atari was bringing out the first arcade game industry.
Really, Pong was, I think, the first game to reach the mass consciousness, showing some of the potential of this new medium of video games.
Video games delivered the possibility of an alternative world in the hands of kids.
I built my own little Pong game. Then Steve Jobs said, wow, Atari. Steve went down and got a job. They put him on a night shift where they would design games, and I got to go down there and see their newest stuff. I was in heaven in those days.
Atari grew very rapidly after Pong. By the end of 1973, we sold over $1 million worth of equipment, and by 1974, probably 3 or 4 million. But we couldn't build them fast enough. So we expanded. We rented an old roller skating rink.
All of the existing coin-op operators immediately jumped aboard the new technology.
Atari probably sold less than 20% of the Pong games in the coin-operated world. We were heavily, heavily copied. There were, at one time, 23 Pong-type manufacturers.
Nutting Associates had computer space ball. Williams had TV tennis. And they were all copies of our game.
Bally and Midway both came out with their own versions of Pong.
Nolan Bushnell had his means to undermine competition, which became a Silicon Valley classic.
Our strategy was to be the most innovative and the most clever company around.
What we had was the ability to design new games, which our competition didn't. But it was very hard to design these games because we were busy trying to make Pong at the same time.
Atari started hiring people at full speed.
I came over and I thought, oh man, that looks pretty fun.
I dressed up, I wore a suit, and I went to the interview. And I walked in and, he's wearing like a t-shirt and blue jeans. I said, thank God, and I pulled off my tie.
It wasn't corporate, it was very casual place.
That was great.
Atari brought the Silicon Valley informal style to a whole different level.
There were, parties every Friday. People would, get together and talk and go around and play each other's games and, give them ideas.
Nolan was starting to fulfill his vision of an Aquarian technology company.
Our creative manifesto was to always take the technology that was possible and turn it into a game. The first change was actually Pong doubles. Then we did a game called Space Race, and then came Gotcha, and then Spike, Volleyball, and then Track 10.
Technical limitations brought to small teams and fast development.
A team typically consisted of a programmer, a technician, and an engineer.
Your options of what you could do were somewhat limited.
And the first thing you had to do was to figure out whether or not you could display what you wanted to show in this game.
In this environment, the mantra for a perfect game started to spread.
Nolan said it has to be easy to learn and difficult to master. The old games are popular because they did gameplay well. They thought about how easy it was to do something interesting in your first experience and how there was something to learn, there was a reason to keep playing it.
One bright day, the revolving doors at Atari brought in the Silicon Valley icon to be, Steve Jobs.
I never expected that his company would be as big and as successful as it is. Incredible. Because I had a chance to own a third of it for $50,000, and I said no.
I've regretted that.
Steve was put on a new game.
I didn't sleep a wink last night.
I needed an engineer to work on Breakout for me.
Nolan didn't know that Steve was not an engineer, could not really design a game.
Steve Jobs came to me one day and he said, Nolan Bushnell, founder of Atari, wants a one-player version of Pong.
Breakout was the testbed of the Apple successful duo.
Breakout was an amazing thing because it was one of those games that just has hung around as one of the classics of all time.
Atari had distributors all around the world, and in Japan they relied on a company called Namco.
Masaya Nakamura, the president of Namco, saw the Yakuza coming out with Breakout knockoffs. And he went to Nolan and said, I need more copies, I need them now. And Nolan said no.
Rumors had it that Nolan was unable to speak or to think clearly on that occasion.
Nolan had been out partying pretty hard by the time that he finally tracked Nolan down. Pretty soon, though, Namco chose to work with Bally and Midway. And so years later, of course, you see Pac-Man come.
Still, in the USA, the coin-op industry was held as one and the same with organized crime.
It was kind of run by mob types, or claimed to be. Indeed, the industry had a bad reputation. In fact, when we started Atari, we tried to go to the bank to get a loan for money. They basically turned us down because they assumed it was a bad industry.
The bad industry had recurring meetings and dinners, but one time Bushnell had another commitment.
Nolan couldn't go, and he said, Al, I want you to go. And I took my wife, and we were sitting at a table with an older couple that were operators. And I introduced myself from Atari, and the guy said, oh, you're from Atari. He reaches in his pocket and pulled out a pistol, puts it on the table. He says, you know, you're operating in my territory. I said, well, we're going to stop right now. I went back, and I told Nolan, the guy pulled a gun on me. Oh, he wasn't going to shoot you. I'm not going to those things anymore, okay?
Although being successful as a new company, Atari was always chasing money.
When you're growing at double and sometimes triple-digit rates, you need a lot of cash. We were just grabbing a tiger by the tail.
At the same time, Nolan's management skills were on the learning curve.
In a year and a half, I went through 4 different presidents, and I fired every one of them. And finally I said, okay, I'm pretty bad, but I'm better than any of these yokels.
The unwritten law of the coin-op business was that when you got a distributor, you could not have 2.
They took a bunch of Atari expatriates and said, okay, just go into that building down the street and call it Key Games, make the best games you can, and Tank, of course, was their masterpiece.
When Atari and Key Games merged back together, Joe Keenan became president.
Joe Keenan actually came up through the ranks, and he turned out to be the president that I needed.
Nolan's attitude towards competition showed up in a meeting about the future of the video game industry.
I was not asked to participate, and it really, really pissed me off. I mean, I was fuming. And so halfway through, I stood up and said, you guys are all a bunch of crooks and jackals. You wouldn't know what the future is because your only talent is copying things that I've designed. You don't know what's in my lab. How can you talk about the future? You're idiots and thieves. That was fun.
My idea was to make some box that would plug into the antenna terminals of a television set and cost $25, right?
Bear's way to video gaming was still passing through the households.
They couldn't build a game for less than $35 or $40, which translated to at least $75, $80, $90, $100 in the final product price.
Bear met a price point that was going to be commonplace.
Even so, as I said, 350,000 was sold. Remember, they went to homes. So at least 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people played them. By the end of 74, 75, several million people that played video games at home.
Odyssey had no future anyway, but someone else would have.
Pong has continued to do well in the arcades. And Nolan says, you know what? We need to bring this to the home.
We felt that there would be an interesting opportunity in the consumer market. You know, this was 1973.
Atari didn't get back into the home business until they saw the Odyssey, and guys like Alan Alcorn and several others inside said, if Bear can do it, we can do it, right?
Atari was beginning to think that the arcade business was just that big.
Our sales were almost equivalent to Bally sales in coin-op, and we were selling about as many games as we could make. We were limited now by the size of the marketplace.
But the drive for a real change had the name of Nolan Bushnell.
I really didn't allow grass to grow under our feet.
Nolan defined the motto of Atari was innovative leisure. It was a very broad definition. From day one, Nolan had the idea that we should be making a home game.
Actually, the idea of entering the home market came early on.
People have always confused the Grass Valley think tank. First of all, they thought Grass Valley was a metaphor for smoking marijuana.
Grass Valley was rural. It was a good place to think and be outdoors.
There were a group of engineers that had left Ampex about the same time we did, and they moved up to a town in the Sierras called Grass Valley.
Grass Valley, the team, was a technology consultant business.
Atari liked them so much that they bought them out and made them a subsidiary of Atari.
I said, I'll fund a research lab wherever you guys want to go.
These guys were responsible for a notable bunch of breakthroughs during the 70s and the 80s.
Larry Emmons and Steve Mayer and Ron Milner were the leaders. There were only a dozen people there. I went up there were 12 people working there, 10 of them men. All of the men had beards except Actually, I think all of them had beards. So I grew my first beard when I went up to work there, and I have never shaved it off.
Location also played a role for these technology monks.
They could really think and focus on things 6 months to a year out. All of the really good innovations came out of Grass Valley.
Innovation was the core business at Atari at that point.
We were acting as the advanced development research firm for all the other coin-op companies in the world. So we thought if we made a custom chip, that nobody else could buy that, and we would have a proprietary.
And innovation was the key to opening the door to a new market.
And if we could sell them in the home, we could sell millions of machines. The other coin-op companies were very upset with us because they said we would steal customers away from the arcade. We said, sure, they're going to be buying our stuff.
At that point, it was all about vision and mindset.
Valley saw themselves as a coin-operated pinball and slot machine manufacturer. They didn't see a broader picture. Nolan had a broader vision.
Sears was the first distributor to put home pong in their sports catalog.
Well, Tom Quinn, the executive of Sears, was a lot looser. He was much more willing to adopt our culture than to force it, and he kind of liked it, actually.
Atari produced 250,000 home pong units for Christmas '75 and sold out.
After that, there was enough business out there for Magnavox to become motivated to put people under license or sue them. I met Nolan on the courtroom steps, the district court in Chicago, and we shook hands, and he opted out and got a paid-up license. He never went to court.
Nolan Bushnell is probably the commercial daddy of an entire industry.
He was surrounded by good guys. Ted Dabney, Alan Alcorn, Steve Bristow. What Nolan contributed, I don't know. I have 150 patents worldwide. Nolan's got 2 or 3. But it's not for me to comment.
The VCS was a big project, with the software and that sort of thing.
We knew that if we could make a cartridge-based game and have the program on a ROM, that we could sell many more games.
The limit of the home pong game was that they could only play pong, more or less.
They had been building more complex games in the arcade space, and they knew they would also want to bring them home.
The idea for a programmable unit was sort of deep within our mind before we even did consumer pong. But the technology, it really took a 6502.
The idea of a general-purpose console leads to a computer, and therefore to a microprocessor.
We then went to a show in San Francisco. When people come running up to the stand saying, I want to buy a microprocessor.
In September of 1975, I and coincidentally, Steve Wozniak and coincidentally, the people from Atari went to the WestCon show in San Francisco, where Chuck Piddle introduced the 6502. We all fell in love with it. The Atari people went off and started thinking about using it for this machine.
Grass Valley was willing to use the 6502 for the new programmable game.
We had a call from a place called Grass Valley, California. Well, it turned out it was the secret place for Atari. So we went up to Grass Valley, and in about a day, we basically made a decision that they could build this product around our 6502.
The most important reasons had to do with architectural speed. How many memory cycles it would take for the processor to accomplish something.
The 6502 would have been at the heart of many video games and home computers during the 80s.
Once the microprocessor was strong enough, which we were pretty sure that it was obvious that that was the way to do it.
The VCS was conceived thinking about the 6502.
The most important thing in a game system is how you run the screen.
We built a machine that had only a line buffer, and that means that the microprocessor is busy rewriting the screen all the way down the screen. It is following the beam. You have to have a fast, efficient processor to be able to keep up with that beam.
But they had to invent a new video chip.
Another chip was necessary to relieve the burden on the 6502.
The TIA, the Stella, did not execute instructions of its own. It could keep track of 5 moving objects and move them horizontally. It was the job of the main processor to first of all, write the correct things to the chip. It had to keep track of when it was time to stop displaying things and begin writing graphics again.
Grass Valley developed this chip on their own.
The basic architecture was laid down by Steve Mayer, Jay Miner, and Ron Milner. My first job when I went up to Grass Valley was to debug it and get it to work.
The code name for the video chip led to a long-lasting misinterpretation.
I looked at my bicycle, said, okay, I'll use Stella as my password. Jay said, that's a nice name. Let's call the chip Stella. He told his boss, Bob Brown, who said, that's a nice name. Let's call the system Stella. And Jay said, oh, well, that means we have to rename the chip. So we renamed the chip the Television Interface Adapter, or TIA. The marketing people thought it must be some woman we know. And so they started naming everything after some woman they knew.
The new console had very limited hardware to keep it feasible cost-wise.
The VCS had one custom chip, a microprocessor, and an off-the-shelf chip that had 128 bytes of memory in it, and a cartridge on a read-only memory, which was 2,000 bytes.
The core technology happened very quickly, in less than 6 months, maybe as little as 3.
Atari was going for the greatest innovation of its entire company life.
We were finished with the chip design and the system design by the fall of 1976. When management came up, they were quite pleased. I'm sure there was beer involved.
Manufacturing happened in the fall of 1977.
We introduced it at this 1977 Consumer Electronics Show. It was a smash hit, one of the best experiences of my professional career. It took over the whole show. It was the talk of the whole show.
Price point followed the same destiny of Odysseys.
We knew that we couldn't sell it for more than $200. We kept trying to get it so that we could build it for under $100. We failed at that.
They realized that most of the money was in the cartridges, not in the main console. And ever since then, makers of game consoles sell those consoles at the lowest price they can afford.
Consumer products that sold more than $200 grabbed a different part of your brain. Under $200, they say, oh yeah, we can kind of afford that.
Keeping costs down was not without consequences.
Because it was so simple and so stripped down, it was hard as hell to program, but you could program anything on it.
The 6502 processor was modified to further reduce costs, and it could only address 4K of memory.
Only so many things it could do. I would first put that object on the screen by writing the program, and then I would stare at that and say, well, you know, if I moved it to the left and I moved it to the right, it could become a video game.
Although the VCS was designed to be a general-purpose machine, it was best suited to handle something that already existed.
The Atari 2600 was designed to play two kinds of games, tank and Pong. So whenever we set out to make a video game, we had to say, how do we take these two tank players and turn them into something else?
Programmers were able to stretch those limits to the unbelievable.
There were thousands of games made for the Atari 2600. Each was just some technical trick that we came up with. The chip designer of the Atari 2600 would just shake his head.
Really?
I had no idea that the hardware that I designed could be used that way.
I got a call one day from a large investor in Warner, and as it turned out, we're a large venture investor in Atari. I can remember the question. He said, would you have any interest in a fast-growing, technologically based entertainment company? And I said yes, not knowing what I was answering yes to.
Manufacturing the VCS for mass market was even more challenging than home Pong.
The VCS, no matter which way I ran the numbers, required more capital than we had.
You have to buy all your inventory, plastics, chips, and so we needed millions of dollars.
Atari needed cash, now more than ever.
We were starting to explore the idea of taking the company public to raise capital.
And we tried that. We actually had a prospectus, and we almost did it.
The stock market was not real strong at the time.
Nolan Bushnell came back to the old idea that brought him to Nutting Associates.
We thought, well, maybe we need a strategic partner. One of the strategic partners that we were introduced to was Warner.
Manny Gerard was at the time one of the smartest entertainment analysts in the country.
I wrote a memo to the people at Warner that said, I have seen the future, and it is called Stella. Stella was the Atari people named every chipset for one of the pretty girls on the production line. And the chipset for the 2600 was called Stella.
Impacting on the Atari world was somewhat shocking for Manny.
I think the first time they saw Nolan, he was surfing on a conveyor belt in a box.
I liked Nolan. He had lots of energy. He was a wonderful storyteller.
On the other hand, the whole Atari environment was wild, at least.
The rumor is, at least, you could get stoned just walking past the air vents. You had these buttoned-down East Coast executives who are very stiff and very refined. And they're dealing with Nolan Bushnell, who sees himself as one of the world's great ladies' men. You know, he's a West Coast cowboy millionaire.
Energetic, sort of larger than life.
Anytime you want.
Big, gregarious guy. My first impression of Nolan was good.
That's real business.
Yeah, it is, unfortunately.
Warner immediately went beyond the idea of being a partner for those guys.
This wasn't the movie world. This wasn't the communications world. This was the high-tech world. And they knew that Nolan knew what he was doing.
They said, why don't we buy the whole company?
I thought we were supposed to gather resources.
This was going to be the first marriage between old analog entertainment and the new digital domain.
They understood the hit record business, movies, and they understood as a company that you might fail and then succeed.
Warner was an entertainment company thinking about the future of entertainment.
The reason we bought Atari was because we had seen the prototypes of the 2600.
Nolan Bushnell resolved to sell his baby, maybe too fast.
It had been a very, very stressful, 5 years. And there was part of me that said, yeah, maybe this is a good time to sell. It was more money than I ever thought I was going to make.
Warner put a big deal of money on the table, or so it looked like.
They bought the company for $28 million or $30 million.
The venture capitalists were given 100% cash. The insiders were given 10% of their proceeds in cash, and the rest in subordinated debentures of Atari.
Warner was very much concerned about keeping the skills within the company.
Wait a minute.
The problem with Atari from our standpoint is you had too many young people who were going to get too rich too fast. My fear was you'd give them the money and they would all disappear.
They resolved to buy them out one step at a time.
And I said it to them at the time, if it really gets bad, we can walk away from these debentures and you don't get anything.
Despite money, Nolan soon began to have second thoughts.
Nolan owned 50% of the company. I think Nolan got $1 million on the closing.
I regretted it probably 6 months in after the sale. I've often thought that if I had just taken a good 2-week vacation, I might not have sold.
Nolan used to say he had told people he was a millionaire for a long time, and now he really was.
The problem was that the first time he had $1 million in his pocket, Nolan went off and started to buy real estate and got very distracted for a period of time.
Probably he was the first Silicon Valley Age of Aquarius geek turned into a tycoon.
He would come breezing through and check the screens and see what was going on and pat everybody on the back.
And that was a real issue.
It's very different running a division of a big company and running your own shop.
In Christmas 1977, and with Warner money, the VCS came out to a lukewarm reception at best.
The VCS comes out, and then, it's a new toy. People really didn't know what to think about it, really. And they were kind of like, well, okay, why? What's different about this? Well, in 1978, Space Invaders hits in America. And now people are starting to understand why.
People have always asked me what percentage of the profits we put into research, and I like to say 150%.
2 good years had passed since the first VCS conception. Too long for Nolan Bushnell.
Nolan and my instinct would be to design a new product, to do a new product. And Warner said no, so they put $100 million into advertising that we never would have done. They were right, and we were wrong.
For the first time, Nolan had to negotiate his ideas with his employer, Warner.
My vision about Atari was to be the best game company in the world, to really create, innovate, and to, in some ways, be more than just a video game company, to be a technology driver, a company that had some innovation, a lot of innovation.
And Nolan has 1,000 ideas a minute, some of which are wonderful, but he loves them all equally.
Nolan definitely wanted the VCS too.
Barely had they hired Nolan when he turns around and says, you know what, the VCS is old technology. We need to get rid of it and move on to the next one.
I think Warner became uncomfortable with this crazy California company.
Manny Gerard didn't actually put much stake in the hardware.
They were marketeers. Their total focus was on the software and selling the software.
Your success was based on how good your games were.
Warner didn't understand the engineering side of it.
I think you can get yourself confused in getting into the fact that it had a technology base.
They viewed
Atari basically as a software business, as an entertainment medium.
More like a record company.
Is it that different from the music business or the movie business or even the publishing business? The answer is probably not.
To be honest, vinyl and film are less prone to Moore's law.
Memory costs had dropped by a factor of 10. Once you can see that, you'd say, this game is crappy. We got to replace it as soon as we can. And they said, we just barely bought this company. I can't win this way.
On top of that, different working habits began to show.
Manny would come in at 9 o'clock to the engineering lab. There'd be nobody there. And he was horrified. We've got deadlines. The culture clash between Atari and Warner was a clash between California and New York management styles.
Silicon Valley was rather new. Warner didn't see the point in opting for a specific management style with Atari.
We were used to dealing with creative cultures. What we were not used to dealing with, to be honest, was quite the culture of Silicon Valley.
It didn't take long until it became clear that Nolan was the problem.
I think it made them very, very nervous to see Nolan making these rapid moves.
We can't run a company based on your instincts solely.
Now all of a sudden he's sold his business for $28 million. He's playing tennis in the morning instead of coming directly to work. And he wants to cut off the VCS.
Manny Gerard wanted budget planning, marketing campaigns, and sales goals.
You cannot disappear for 6 months, walk into a meeting and say, we're going to do it this way because I say so. You've got to bring somebody in here with business discipline because this thing is growing, it's growing too fast, and it's going to go out of control.
Manny started to look outside of Atari, and word spread.
I was having lunch with a classmate of mine from Harvard Business School, and he asked me if I would be interested in working for a company in California named Atari. Absolutely not. I said, I love my job, and I have no interest in living in California. I'm a New Yorker.
Ray Kassar was a vice president at Burlington Industries, a textile giant.
I met Manny. Supposed to have been a very short interview. It was about a 3 or 4 hour because Manny likes to talk. So finally I said, look, I'll go out there for a weekend and check the place, but that's all I will do.
Ray, the New Yorker, let himself be courted by the VCS idea.
I went to California. I met Nolan Bushnell. I was very intrigued with the product. I thought it lacked everything. There was no marketing, there was no infrastructure, there was no manufacturing guy, there was no financial guy, there was nothing. And a few days later, Manny asked me to come to have a meeting with him and Steve Ross. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I said, I'll go there for 6 months. I'll start the process of reorganizing the company. And then I'm coming back to New York. I stayed for 8 years, I guess.
It was pretty obvious to us that he was there to replace Nolan.
Manny was feeling more and more confident about getting rid of Nolan.
The showdown between Nolan and Manny Gerard came early on.
He said, you know, we're going to put Ray Kassar in as CEO, and you can stay as a consultant if you want or not. And I said, you know, this isn't my company anymore.
What occurred at that point was an incident.
Nolan came into the budget meeting in December '79 and just looked up and said, sell off all your inventory of 2600, it's over. Forget the Warner people. The Atari people didn't know what he was talking about. They just gasped. The chairman of the company board, the guy who invented it, says it's all over.
At that point, there wasn't much Nolan could do to avoid game over.
Manny said, if you keep on going around undermining me, that's going to be bad for the company. Nolan said, then get rid of me. You know, buy me out. And they did.
There were certain elements of my contract that were better off if they fired me than if I quit. So I had decided to be such a pain in the ass that they would fire me. And it worked.
Getting fired was the easiest task for Nolan in years.
He was wearing a T-shirt which said, "I love to fuck." He was walking around the company wearing this T-shirt. Okay, I thought, they're a little crazy out here, but... And then he invited me to a staff meeting. Al Alcorn and all the key engineers were there, about 6 or 7 people, and all drinking beer and smoking joints.
Right, and pulls out a joint. And
so this one guy poked me, said, "Here." I said, "No, I don't smoke." And they said, "Oh, kind of lighten up, you're such a stiff New Yorker. This is California." I said, "Nolan, if you're going to conduct business, fine. Otherwise, I'm busy." I got up and left.
Thank you very much, Harold. What's going on here? Oh, Jesus Christ.
Ray Kazar had wanted to be CEO of Atari, maybe from the very start.
I realized I couldn't function with this environment unless I was running the show. So I went back and I said to Manny, "I have to be in charge, otherwise I can't do anything for you. I'm coming home."
With Nolan Bushnell, they applied what they called the beach clause.
Removed him, and he eventually came to me and asked to be relieved of his contract, which we did.
Yeah.
He said, "Will you buy back my debentures?" We bought him back.
Warner had bought out the shareholders in a very clever way.
Warner, Manny, probably figured that we would piss the money away and kill ourselves with cocaine or something.
We got to figure out where we were.
They structured the buyout. It was a 7-year payout of money.
And he took his money, and he left. And then when the explosion at Atari occurred, he had this very small residual position in the bonus pool that would have been worth millions and millions of dollars. It's a whole complicated story about individuals and corporations.
I said I wouldn't stay unless I was in charge. I'm sure he was asked to leave. He resigned.
Without Nolan, the Atari identity was at risk.
I really liked Nolan. So I was hoping that Atari would replace him with somebody else who understood technology and marketing. But I don't think Ray was a technologist.
Ray imprinted Atari with his own management style.
The corporate office has changed. Ray didn't play video games. The office was very simple and bare. We always have the next secret great video game in the office.
Did you think it was significant? Why would I want to have a game there unless I was going to play with it? I wanted to focus on the work, let people know I'm not there playing games in my office, but I had them in my house. I had a whole room. I had coin-op products in every consumer video game we had.
Surprisingly enough, Al Alcorn attempted to stay within Atari.
Okay. I didn't leave. Nolan left. I wanted to stay around. Atari was my baby.
Soon, the true reasons behind Nolan's departure started to become apparent.
Atari became a little bit less technology focused. They became much better at managing things and managing inventory.
I didn't realize how serious it was when I got there.
Hit me, Atari.
They were losing money. The company was losing money.
Sorry, Miss Channing.
The focus was on making the VCS a successful product. And that's where I devoted my energies.
But the age of Aquarius Company was fading away, once and for all.
Culture clash. It was very formal, very hierarchical. He instituted an executive dining room so that the executives didn't have to work with the engineers or touch them.
In a while, the new management was going to learn that in Silicon Valley, technology and creativity are one and the same.
I think they missed something creatively. If you have a successful product, it's incumbent on you to figure out what to replace it with before your competitors do.
Think fast.
The one insight we didn't have was that you have to obsolete your own products as fast as you can.
Think fast.
I found that Ray was so much different than me. I mean, the idea of having a car and a driver bring me to work every day was so foreign to everything I stood for.
No, it wasn't a limousine, well, my car. There's a little difference. I had a driver. That was one thing I insisted on. I said, I'm not a very good driver, and I don't want to drive on 101. I would need a driver. And they said, no problem. was not a limousine.
It was just the wrong way to run an Age of Aquarius company.
The controversy between Bushnell and Kassar went on even when Nolan was no longer there.
He's a very creative individual. He's the idea man, and he's brilliant. But he's not a guy, in my opinion, capable of running a business.
What about Ray Kassar?
I think their strategy under Kassar, if one existed, was sell as many of these things as we can. They saw them as widgets.
That's so wrong.
They didn't see a pathway to the future.
In fact, Warner was trying to move away from the usual cash nightmare.
What this company needed more than anything else was just somebody who understood how to manage a decent-sized business and had sound business principles.
There was no marketing to speak of. They weren't even calling on the chains like Sears, Penny. There was nothing.
The coin-op division was the only one which seemed to be working properly.
We had a very strong coin-op position as opposed to what we had in consumer.
We really tried to keep that building as an island of creativity amidst all of the big company culture that was growing up.
Soon after Ray began working at Atari, things started to change.
And we were beginning to get the distribution, and we were beginning to sell Sears and other major. We finally got into Walmart. That's what we needed. We didn't have that. I would say advertising was probably the most important thing. We went to Doyle Dane, which was at that point the top advertising agency.
In 1978, Atari was basically turning into a different company.
We went from a small engineering-driven company to a very large marketing-driven company.
Ray Kassar came into direct conflict with the engineering style that had been established at Atari for many years.
The relationship between Ray and the hippie techs from the Bay Area never took off.
Ray came from a very stable fabric industry. I think he figured he had a product, VCS, that was going to last forever. High tech is changing all the time.
In one of the very first meetings he held, Ray sounded pretty weird.
He said that we were going to start selling computers in designer colors so that women would buy them. He was 16 years ahead of the iMac.
Do you change your decor to match your iMac?
We in engineering were appalled. We thought, yes, he gets merchandising and marketing, but he doesn't understand the technology at all.
Christmas 1978 was the moment of truth for Manny and Ray.
And I got called into Steve Ross's office. It was the chairman of Warner, and we were alone. And he said, what are we going to do? Now remember, this is about December 10th. I said, on December 26th, there won't be a 2600 on any shelf in any store in America. If I'm right, we've got a huge business. If I'm wrong, we're in trouble. But there's nothing we can do in the next 50 days, so let's relax and see what happens. And of course, December 26th, you couldn't get your hands on it. I mean, the thing just blew through. It was one of the biggest products in the country. 1979 was the year, and it was Space Invaders. This is an interesting story.
Manny Gerard was the kind of New Yorker that liked to be on the West Coast most of the time.
One day, I went over to coin-operated engineering with the people who made the games for the arcades. And here are all our engineers with coin-operated Space Invaders, not even our game, and they're playing Space Invaders. I went into Ray Kassar's office and I said, Ray, I want to make a Space Invaders cartridge, and I want to license the name.
Licensing a coin-op title for the home was rather new. More often, you simply stole the technology.
And I said to him, Ray, if we can't license the name, steal the technology. I said, duplicate it. But I'd rather license the name. And we did.
Licensing became reasonable when video games became brands.
Through 78, the majority of things are Pong and racing. Space Invaders creates this relentless world. You know you're going to die sooner or later. Those Space Invaders, they just keep on marching back and forth and back and forth. And, your bases are dissolving around you. And it's a pretty good representation of a nightmare.
Two things made Space Invaders a breakthrough. One was the gameplay.
I mean, Space Invaders was a monster game. I mean, it was such a good game.
Space Invaders was another game that had the beauty of the simple to learn, hard to master. You could see how the game was getting more difficult as the aliens moved faster and dropped down lower.
But Space Invaders could also convey the idea that you were there somehow.
The gameplay, the pacing of the game, the suspense, the theme was, just completely captivating. I think captured the entire world really to the potential of video games and where they could go.
It was clear from the start that Space Invaders could start a craze.
When Space Invaders started in Japan, many thousands of arcades opened up just to be able to play Space Invaders.
They were called invader houses. This caused a shortage of the 100 yen coin in Japan.
Manny Gerard's move proved to be the right one.
We licensed Space Invaders, and the game was introduced in September of '79, and it was an instant phenomenon. Suddenly, the 2600 was the most exciting product anybody had ever seen.
So we got an Atari video game.
This was more of a brand license than anything else.
The Atari VCS technically could not actually do Space Invaders. You were not supposed to be able to have rows full of enemies that could be individually shot. So they would tell it to draw that same sprite over and over and over again. It didn't quite look like the arcade version, but it was unmistakably Space Invaders, and it was a big, big hit for Atari.
Space Invaders had opened a brief era, now known as the Golden Age.
There was an arcade golden age that started in late '79. It really lasted through '81. In 1981, Americans spent 75,000 man-years playing arcade games. They dropped 20 billion quarters into arcade machines. That's a golden age.
Video game creativity was probably reaching a peak in those days.
You get Galaxia, Moon Cresta, and people are enjoying those, and then comes Pac-Man, and no one was ready for that.
Pac-Man was yet another shift in terms of audience.
Iwatani wanted to appeal to women, and specifically he wanted to appeal to couples. You know, if I can get these two people on a date to play this game together, then I could really possibly have a hit on my hands.
Toru Iwatani had been doing marketing from the developer standpoint.
Girls love getting dessert at restaurants, so, you know, what if I had a game with all of these little food items in it? Let's make the monsters cute. Let's not do a space game where everything is black and white. Let's make very vibrant colors. The girl, who was probably the one dragging the guy to the bowling alley, she would actually say, oh, that's so cute, I want to go play this game.
Iwatani's ideas definitely hit the mark.
So within a year, Pac-Man's on the cover of Time magazine and Mad magazine in the same year.
Before Pac-Man, most of the people who would hang out there would have lots of tattoos and smoke cigars. Pac-Man came out, it started bringing the public into the recreation centers.
Once again, the gameplay was pretty easy to learn.
You are pretty much guaranteed of making progress when you first start playing it. You start eating dots, your score starts going up. I mean, it's very, very easy in Pac-Man to eat the first Energizer dot, and it's very easy to eat your first ghost.
At the same time, Atari was experimenting with vector displays.
They were very clear. You could create Star Wars-looking spaceships. That's what Space Wars had looked like from the start.
One of the smartest engineers in the coin-op division was Ed Logg, the Golden Boy.
Ed Logg did Asteroids, which was the Atari's all-time biggest game.
Every time you shoot one to blow it up and protect your ship, it breaks into smaller asteroids. I think he wanted to include elements of the game, the impending doom kind of elements, just self-preservation, that were found in Space Invaders.
Asteroids perfectly applied the Atari mantra about gameplay.
If you looked up easy to learn, hard to master in a book of quotes, there would be a picture of asteroids right next to it.
Also, Ed Rothberg achieved huge outcomes with vector displays.
Ed Rothberg, who came up with Battlezone.
The game was based upon taking the original tank game idea and making a first-person 3D game using the vector graphics.
Battlezone was a step forward to an immersive environment.
This was the first game that let you freely move around in a three-dimensional world. Yeah, that was new. That was not something that most people experienced.
The arcade games had progressed to the point where they were more like a computer that you might recognize today.
You should design your business on the assumption that not all of the smart people in the world work for you.
By the beginning of the 1980s, the VCS was still surprisingly successful.
They were doubling their sales volume every year. They went from 30 million to 60 million to 120 million to $250 million to $500 million to $1 billion to $2 billion in consecutive years. In 1982, they grossed $2 billion.
This was the hardware that appeared severely limited in 1977.
The programmers continually surprised us with how clever they were, and it went a lot farther than anybody expected.
David Crane from the consumer division was considered to be one of the wizards of the VCS.
I actually loved that machine. You have the hardware telling you, well, this is all you can do. The technical boundaries, they could lead you in a direction.
Throughout 1978, Mattel had considered entering the console market.
Mattel looked and said, you know what, that VCS, that's a toy. We should be doing that too.
Mattel was saying, technology is coming down the pipes to do a better job, to put up an entire screen at a time.
Not so different from the VCS, Intellivision relied on a dedicated chip for graphics.
We called it STIC, S-T-I-C, Standard Television Interface Chip, which sounds nice and generic and presumptuous. Basically, it created 8 positionable objects, so that freed up the processor to concentrate entirely on the gameplay.
It's a lot more fun and a bigger challenge.
Cleverly enough, Dave Rolfe compiled an operating system for the Intellivision.
You have to draw the object, you have to put the picture into the video memory, you have to give commands to the computer hardware. A lot of that is very generic. So all the stuff which is similar, common between games, could be put into a common operating system, which was another reason we could do better games.
In 1981, the console war was reaching its climax, and Nintendo was trying to benefit from it.
We were not in home video game business yet. So we decided the successful Donkey Kong in coin-op, we should license it to different companies. We looked at Atari and Coleco and other companies.
The console war had ignited another war, the license war.
You had kids who were going to arcades and playing games. You knew what the hits were in advance. It's like saying, gee, I'd like Harry Potter books to make movies. Of course you would, they're pre-sold. The marketing is done.
Coleco had entered the video game market as early as 1976.
Coleco was short for Connecticut Leather Company. Greenberg, the guy who owned Coleco, had big ideas. He's like Nolan. He doesn't want to stay small. And so he expanded into video games.
The Coleco Telstar had been the competitor of the Atari Home Pong back in 1976.
Coleco made a pretty good splash with the Telstar and their early Pong competition. Made a much bigger splash years later in '81 when they came out with the ColecoVision.
In 1982, Coleco hardware could beat the VCS by an order of magnitude.
We decided ColecoVision is probably the best quality hardware. Coleco doesn't have many hot games, so they will really push Donkey Kong in order to sell the hardware. So Coleco started marketing ColecoVision together with Donkey Kong.
Donkey Kong on ColecoVision looked just like the arcade game.
Manny Gerard was the strongest supporter of a Donkey Kong license.
I said to Ray Kassar, why didn't we license the Donkey Kong? And he said, and this one's burned in my brain, he said, because they wanted $2 a cartridge for it. We're still paying 50, 60 cents. Ray, we got 88% gross margins on these cartridges. A year from now, Ray, we will collectively crawl through shards of broken glass to pay $2 a cartridge.
I don't remember any serious discussion about Donkey Kong, quite frankly.
At that moment, licensing coin-op brands or any other brand or concept was the key to success.
The business was outrageously profitable. And what was driving the business was the coin-op title.
Mattel was interested in licensing product. Coleco was interested in licensing product. Everybody wanted a license.
Mattel had found a decent market share in sports games.
Mattel was very big on buying company logos. It wasn't baseball, it was Major League Baseball. They had the logo. Blackjack and poker, it wasn't Blackjack and poker, it was Las Vegas Blackjack and Poker. They paid the, I think, city of Las Vegas for that logo.
ColecoVision was indisputably more powerful than any other console around.
And their whole thing was arcade fidelity. They looked so much more like their arcade counterparts than anything you're going to get on the Atari, anything you're going to get on the Intellivision.
Most popular home video games.
More and more, the consumer division at Atari was relying on third-party properties.
Strategically, it was very smart. The execution was not always very good. In fact, it was poor in some cases.
It's the new Frogger home video game. Ribbit. It's just like the arcade game.
The downside of licensing a brand is that you have a promise to honor.
You know, people were expecting to see, you know, the detailed graphics of the arcade machines, but they would end up seeing the simple graphics of the VCS machine. Most of the conversions of the arcade games into the VCS turned out to be quite challenging.
The explosion in software created what I always like to call the intellectual blue collar.
One day, Atari programmers understood their actual role in the business.
The marketing department sent out a memo. What they were saying was, do more that sold a lot of games instead of the kind that sold a few games.
The memo, for the sake of exactitude, reported some numbers.
We added them up, and the four of us were responsible for 60% of Atari's sales. So the four of us were responsible for $60 million in 1 year.
Needless to say, those engineers were very good at math.
In the software industry, the people at the bottom of the org chart were just as smart, if not smarter, than the people who were managing them, which was okay as long as the people who were managing them didn't try to manipulate them.
Ray's relation with game designers was not ideal from the very start.
Ray famously held a meeting when he first got in, and he said, you know, I want to put everyone's fears to rest. I've worked with designers for years in my career. And somebody thought, oh my Lord, he's talking about towel designers.
Bob Whitehead, Alan Miller, Larry Kaplan, and David Crane decided to go see Ray Kassar.
We took that memo and we went to Ray Kassar and we said, you know, we're good company men. We love Atari.
A lot of these games, they were created by one guy. If there's music in the game, the guy did the music. If there's art in the game, the guy did the art.
They made a proposal which saw royalties involved.
Can you just take 10 cents out of every cartridge and put it into a bonus pool and, you know, divide it up so that those people who do better games make more money?
They can't put their names on the games. They can take no credit. They're not even really supposed to go home and say, hey, I worked on this game if they see someone playing it.
This was not the business model that Kassar had in mind.
Ray Kassar looked us in the eye and said, you are no more important to Atari than the person on the assembly line who puts them together.
I don't remember their coming to me and asking for a bonus.
The engineers started to think seriously that Kassar didn't like them at all.
He was quoted in, I think, Fortune magazines, calling our engineers a bunch of high-strung prima donnas, and a dime a dozen.
They are prima donnas. They were, but they were great.
Within a week, we had a T-shirt made that said, I'm just a high-strung prima donna engineer from Atari.
The four programmers left Ray's office with a precise idea in mind.
We were escorted out of his office by one of his senior vice presidents. He said, it's pretty clear you guys are going to be leaving. Good luck. I wish you well. There's nothing we can do.
The initial idea behind Activision was still very corporate, indeed.
We should either go out and form just a small company to develop games and sell them back to Atari.
We weren't ready to work with an outside group like that.
Or maybe we just go all the way and create a publishing company. Activision was the first third-party developer of video game software.
Manny Gerard had known from the very start that Atari was just another form of the entertainment industry.
Let's be straight about this. Forget the superstars. The superstars always reach a place where they can get whatever they want. But in the main, as you go through any creative industry, I don't care if it's movies or music or video games, the creators of great success frequently feel, and maybe correctly, but the business model don't like, that they don't get enough money because you don't know what a great success is. You don't know it till after it happened.
Interest about the new company was rising high.
Activision went to its first trade show with 4 games for sale: Dragster, Boxing, Checkers, and Fishing Derby. Activision was, it was the hit of the show, I have to say.
Initially, Atari wasn't that much concerned about the competition.
They thought they were safe because they had trade secrets that weren't published on a machine that was difficult to program.
We tried to stop them by suing them, and that didn't work.
In court, Activision easily demonstrated that they didn't steal any secrets.
It was possible to reverse engineer how it was programmed so that they could do business without being subject to a theft of trade secrets prosecution.
I think Atari actually tried to sue them to find out how they had done some of the things they were doing.
Activision's games actually had something that the Atari ones lacked.
We used a number of techniques.
They were doing 2 or 3 times the number of colors that the system was supposed to be able to show.
We would only use the greenest grass and the bluest sky. He would say, wow, that looks better than the games that Atari is doing. And nobody understood why.
Just last night, I was lost in the jungle with Pitfall Harry, surrounded by...
David Crane went on to design one of the best-known VCS games of all time.
I figured out a way to draw a little running man. So I asked myself, all right, he's running. Where is he running? So it made a path. So now he's running on a path. Well, where is the path? Let's put the path in a jungle. I drew a couple trees. Why is he running? I put some treasures and some, the scorpions.
Pitfall urged the player to explore a whole new world within the machine.
I used a special binary counter to define the screens instead of making every screen a block of data. There were 254 screens, I think, in the Pitfall world.
Technically, Pitfall inspired thousands of games. Yet to come.
What it did do is it created an entire genre of video games, what are called the platform games. There were maybe 600 platformer games made after Pitfall.
Unfortunately, Activision's success inspired emulation in the Atari ranks.
Most of the people didn't particularly like the guys at Activision.
They kind of looked down on everyone else, according to everyone else at least.
Especially Dave Crane, who has that sort of inherent personality anyway.
Activision's success made people say, well, gee, all I have to do is borrow some money from a venture capitalist, put some programmers in a room, and tell them to design video games.
Other key people in the consumer division were thinking about leaving.
About that time, I had decided that the 5,000-person, multi-billion-dollar company environment wasn't for me anymore. I called up my good friend, Bill Grubb, who was the vice president of sales at Atari for the consumer division. 2 weeks later, a magic was born. We went out and raised a couple of $1 million in a couple of days.
The game developers were becoming something closer to an entertainment star than some weird engineer.
It's easy to say it wasn't only the money.
Atari wanted the programmers to remain anonymous. And we made it a point to identify the programmers and the artists.
Competition brought better games, at least initially.
We, as programmers, took upon ourselves to continually challenge Activision. Our biggest hit out of the chute was a product called Demon Attack, which was done by Rob Fulla. That was a big hit for Magic. We sold many millions of those.
As entertainment stars, programmers started to behave accordingly.
Programmer egos were much larger than what would have fit in 128 bytes.
I used to drive, at that time, a Porsche 928. David Crane had a BMW 7 Series. We all drove, fancy, fast cars, and we all made a lot of money.
Behaving as stars had its upsides as well as the downsides.
They were very sensitive, very creative, like children. So I spent a lot of time trying to reassure them that I wasn't really a bad guy. I remember we had this one guy. He stayed with me for 3 hours telling me about his poetry and how he came to work at midnight because he couldn't work during the day and all his idiosyncrasies. And I had to be a very good listener.
You can't keep me in here, Atari.
Kassar's concessions came too late and too little.
So all the good engineers, all the good programmers left Atari. Even though Ray raised the salaries, he didn't even know how to hire the best engineers. He couldn't tell a good one from a bad one.
Kassar avoided disaster just a few seconds before all of the programmers left.
I was about to leave on the 3rd round of company formations that Atari came up with their own competitive bonus plan.
Each with different exits.
1980 had been the year of Pac-Man.
We concluded that nobody was ever going to make a better game than Pac-Man.
Atari reacted rapidly in the wave of the license war.
It was a big hit in Japan, and we did make a deal with Namco.
The 2600 was limited in its technology, and the technology got pushed and pushed and pushed until you couldn't push it anymore. And you couldn't do any more with it.
Despite hardware constraints, Atari put out tons of their own Pac-Man.
They made more games than there were consoles out there in use at that time. They figured people would be so excited to buy Pac-Man that they'd buy a console just to play the game.
But hardware constraints backlashed against the Pac-Man conversion.
Converting coin-op games to the VCS was never really a good thing to do because the VCS was a static technology and coin-op games kept getting better and better.
Pac-Man had too many objects on the screen, moving too fast and too independently.
Pac-Man kind of flickered back and forth.
The system only supports 2 8-bit sprites. The designer of Pac-Man cartridge uses one of them for the little eater thing that runs around the screen, and he uses one of them for all the other ghosts. Now, there are 4 of them on the screen at any given time, so he's basically displaying each ghost 1/4 of the time. Now that makes it flicker.
Only some executives at Atari were taking the technical limitation of the VCS into the proper account.
It sold zillions of copies, just because the name was powerful enough to carry. Well, I'm meant to be proud of the cartridge, and the public had a right to be disappointed.
Game quality didn't seem to be a serious issue, as long as sales kept going.
We sold 6 million copies. I don't know what else I can say to confirm. It was probably the most successful launch of video game or any product in America. The game wasn't bad, it could have been better. I mean, it wasn't maybe the greatest, it was fine.
At the engineering level, the opinions were much less forgiving.
They marketed it as Pac-Man, and what they released had nothing to do with Pac-Man, which made the Pac-Man experience look that much worse.
Disaffection started to spread like a virus among the VCS users.
When Atari released 10 million Pac-Man cartridges, that was the beginning of the end of Atari.
Okay, the E.T. video game was a very interesting situation, to say the least.
The Atari collapse was really a story about E.T.
Steve Ross was once at lunch with Steven Spielberg and had what he thought was a great idea.
Steve Ross cuts a deal with Steven Spielberg for the name E.T.
He said, we make a video game out of his movie E.T., and I've guaranteed a $25 million payment. He said, what do you think? I said, I think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
In 1982, the licensing war seemed to peak.
Unfortunately, the 2600 hardware couldn't do just any video game. The reason video games that were done as movie titles didn't do very well is because they couldn't be done very well.
What was clear from the very start was that the available time was insufficient for doing anything.
I said, gee, this is now August, Steve. He wanted this product created and shipped for Christmas business. I said, the lead times, just getting the semiconductor chips, is longer than 6 months. We're going to have a hard time getting the chips we need.
Also, creative concerns arose.
The character wasn't basically appealing other than in the movie. It was this ugly creature.
I don't know if we could make an action game out of a story like E.T.
Atari had gone through these kind of operations before.
Atari had negotiated with Steven Spielberg to get the rights of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Inevitably, movies had an emotional component that no one had ever explored in games.
Then I sat down 10.5 to 11 months of solid work doing that game. It was a million seller.
Ray Kassar was still very skeptical about going through the process.
I tried to convince Steve that it doesn't make sense. He said, well, do the best you can. We did the best we could.
The schedule was extremely tight.
The movie was in the spring, and then by Christmas the same year, Atari wanted to come up with the E.T. game.
That leaves about 5.5 weeks to do the game.
At that point, the notorious Howard Warshaw entered the picture.
They called up our department and said, who can do the E.T. game in 5.5 weeks? And my boss's boss told Ray Kassar, no one. But Ray Kassar decided it was worth calling me anyway. You know, Howard, we just got the rights to E.T. Can you do the E.T. video game in 5 weeks? And I said to him, I absolutely can do the game in 5 weeks. I said, provided we reach the right deal. And he said, okay.
Kassar thought Warshaw was the only one who could make it. Actually, he was the only one that didn't say no.
The deal was that I got an additional bonus and I got an additional advance. And they signed it off and gave me a check, and it was, and I did the game.
Warshaw got his deal and went back to work.
Hello? Somebody out there? video game?
They came out with an E.T. game that was a real bummer.
The E.T. was a truly terrible game.
I mean, E.T. kept on falling into all those little ditches and then you had to float him out, and the game stunk.
Warsaw had to meet with Steven Spielberg to discuss the concept.
The secret to doing a game in 5 weeks is to design a game that can be done in 5 weeks. I had a couple of days to design the game, and then we flew to L.A. to present the design to Steven Spielberg.
Mr. Spielberg proved once again to understand the entertainment business very well.
Pretty cool. He goes, I kind of like that, but couldn't you do something a little more like Pac-Man? I looked at him, and what I wanted to say to him was, gee, Steven, you know, couldn't you do something a little more like The Day the Earth Stood Still? But I didn't say that because it was Steven Spielberg, and I was just me.
At that time, Warsaw thought he would just stick with his ditches idea.
Maybe he was right. Maybe we should have done something a little more like Pac-Man.
Atari pushed the game like they never had before.
It didn't take long until people find it's not a good game. So people returned it to the store, and retailer tried to return it to Atari, and it was chaos.
Once a toy goes into the closet, it never comes out again.
The E.T. flop triggered a domino effect on the whole business.
One of the reasons it's known as one of the worst games of all time is not even because of the gameplay. One of the reasons it's known is because of the financial disaster that it seemed to have generated.
We produced 4 million, and 4 million came back. I knew we were going to have a terrible quarter.
There were a lot of returns, along with millions and millions of other cartridges that weren't selling.
A sense of panic started to spread through the ranks.
Movies are going to fail, records are going to fail, and the minute you get a management that gets beat up, the minute they have something that fails, you're dead, because they no longer think clearly.
Ray Kassar felt he couldn't really rely on his team the way he used to do.
There was a lack of really good product. No one was very creative. Suddenly, something happened. We all got depressed. We were doing so well, and all of a sudden, because of something we had to do, we had this failure. And it was tough. It was very tough on all of us.
Worse than that, gamers all over the country started to be less enthusiastic about video games.
Pac-Man was a failure in delivering the most popular video game of the time, and then E.T. was a failure in delivering the most popular movie of the time.
A lot of people said, you know what? I'm done with this.
Howard Warsaw took the money home and is still thinking about it.
Was it the worst game ever made? I've also done Yar's Revenge, which frequently on a lot of lists is known as the best game of all time on the VCS. So having done the best and the worst, I figure I have the greatest range of any game designer in history. I'm very proud of that fact.
On December 7th, 1982, we had to make an announcement about the fact that our earnings were going to be well below expectation.
For several days, Manny Gerard had tried to understand what his intuition was telling him.
I remember it well. It all started because I kept asking questions of the salespeople about the sales of the E.T. cartridge. How are they selling? Was Pac-Man that? Oh, they're selling great. We're going to meet the projections. Everything's fine.
Unfortunately, one of the most difficult things at Atari seemed to be obtaining the numbers easily.
They had created such a stratified management that top management was unaware of what was going on in the field. And by the time they realized that nothing was selling, it was too late.
Apparently, Manny was the only one to feel something was going wrong.
I didn't believe it. Well, my gut told me it wasn't going to happen. I was nervous. So I had called up Dennis Groth, who was the CFO of Atari, Chief Financial Officer. And I said, Dennis, I want you to go through the numbers, and I want you to tell me what's happening. And the night of December 6th, I got a call. And he said, I've been through the numbers, Manny. We're not going to make the numbers at all.
Not meeting projections was not appreciated on Wall Street.
Atari was making, I think, over between $1 and $2 billion a year. We were the largest revenue producer for all of Warner Communications.
After Atari was making lots of money, we got T-shirts that said Warner and Atari Company.
Obviously, Warner had to be crystal clear about the situation.
We waited for Steve Ross to come in, and we sat down in a room, and we all came to the same obvious conclusion. And we put out that announcement, and as you know, the stock got murdered.
They were not going to go into the red, but they were going to grow 15% instead of 50%, which was not appreciated.
By the end of the day, Warner Communications stock had dropped by 1/3.
It was not the fun day, I will tell you.
The reason why Atari didn't meet the projections was a whole different matter.
They'd sold as many 2600s to anybody that wanted them. And to try to push another 10, 15 million units into the marketplace.
It was too much, and you had a lot of retailers getting very scared.
One undeniable fact was the Atari VCS obsolescence.
Coleco comes along, and television is there, and Atari realizes that way too late that they need to step it up.
If I'd have been running Atari, the VCS2 would have been out in 1980, and the people who had grown tired of the 2600 would have started to buy the next generation, which is what we see today.
Engineers blame the management for not understanding video gaming at all.
It takes more than one person to create a failure of this magnitude. Atari was the fastest growing company in the history of American business. Nolan Bushnell sold it for $22 million, and like 2 years later, it had $1 billion in sales.
The video game industry was still at that point quite a mysterious object.
There were plenty of games that hadn't sold well before Pac-Man and E.T., but they didn't create the kind of financial crisis and the kind of consumer confidence crisis that Pac-Man and E.T. did.
The business model at Atari was still a trial and error learning process. $1 billion a shot.
All the business models subsequently are built on the fact that I have complete control over the software that goes on my system. We spent hours with lawyers. Is there any way we control the software? The answer was no.
Literally, everyone was publishing video games, putting quality and price points severely at risk.
The Quaker Oats company that makes breakfast cereals had a video game company. Every one of those companies built 1 million cartridges and didn't sell. And then they started selling them at $5 a piece.
This roller coaster ride filled the retailers with mixed feelings.
The retailers were never really sure that this whole video games thing was going to keep going.
Atari, on its side, had the power for putting distributors under pressure.
When the tide started to turn, everyone who got a chance to screw Atari screwed them to the wall. The dam started to crack with Pac-Man. Cracks got a little wider with E.T. When the first few major cracks occurred, bam, killed the village. It drowned the whole town.
The only one to have a different opinion about the quality issue is Mr. Bushnell himself.
I believe that controlling the software has been a very, very faulty analysis of what happened. The crappy software story had nothing to do with what was going on. Warner tried to put 15 million VCSs into a market that only wanted 2. And whenever you have that much supply overhang, markets crash.
There's little doubt that the man who pushed the market so far was Ray Kassar.
Ray was in charge of a wild runaway train, and he really didn't know what was going on.
Could it be that Atari was simply not manageable at all?
When I got there in '78, the company was doing about $78 million in sales. 3 years later, we were doing over $3 billion.
When Atari was moving up so rapidly, we added a lot of overhead. We, for example, went and built a factory in Hong Kong. We decided, well, now we'll go build a plant in Ireland.
Atari's growth was one never heard of before and quite astonishing.
When I got there, I don't remember the exact head count, but let's say maybe it was 150. When I left, it was 12,000. To go from 150 to 12,000, it's a nightmare.
When income started to slow down, Ray Kassar was not prepared to kill his creature.
I remember I made an effort. I came up with a plan to reorganize the company.
You've got to go in and just hack it away with incredible speed, and very few people are capable of doing that.
Ray and Manny were looking at things getting worse day after day.
Next year, it went down to $200 million. So it's not like, down 10% or down 15%. It's like less than 1/10 or less than 1/20.
Nolan Bushnell was clever enough to make a profit from the bad situation.
I actually had a big short on the Warner stock. I made a lot of money when they failed. But at the same time, I would have preferred to have continued to be running Atari.
My own opinion, and I take some responsibility for part of this too, was Atari became so successful, so fast, and was so profitable I think it went to everybody's head. And I think that led to some mistakes.
Atari had invented an entire industry from scratch.
We spent a lot of time looking at the business and asking ourselves, where can it go? To some extent, in the short run, it was a fad.
The inception of Atari had been coin-operated video games.
The arcade business has dropped off the face of the earth. People said, you know, this year I think I'm going to take up tennis, or next time I go to the bowling alley.
Their parents, their mother and father suddenly said, I just bought you this home game system. I'm not going to pay for you to go to the arcade anymore.
The turning point happened when Warner bought Atari with cash.
Just doing a spreadsheet to show that it makes economic sense isn't enough. There's a thing called culture, the way the people behave, the way they work.
Atari was the first genuine Silicon Valley Age of Aquarius company.
As in many cases, entrepreneurs who create great businesses were not meant to run them. I see Atari more of a case than that than anything else.
As in every Silicon Valley company from then on, handling technology was the key to success or failure.
Atari didn't really have much of a plan for what's going to happen next year. Warner attempted to make it into a company with long-term plans, long-term goals. It's hard to plan for, brilliant ideas.
In a single moment, Atari lost control of its technology core.
You've got to obsolete your own products as fast as you can, because if you don't, somebody else is going to do it. And I don't believe now that that was our mindset at the time. And I'm partly responsible.
Surely, no one had envisioned the growth rate that Warner would have been able to give to Atari.
Nobody, even Nolan Bushnell, had any idea how big Atari was going to be, or Bushnell would never have sold it as he did to Warner for $22 million.
The fundamentals of the business were very easy to learn.
I felt that the nature of man is to play. That there have been games throughout history, and games have always taken on the technology of the time. The video game technology was digital technology, and now it allowed you to have unique rules and motion and dynamics and speed and simulation.
At one point, the medium itself became the drive for the video game success.
This exciting new thing to do is what made it big. It was a natural thing, and it was huge. And so it took off.
And then Warner money, with Manny Gerard's and Ray Kassar's skills, made it happen on a never-expected scale.
But it was a terrific experience for me. We all felt we were doing almost something historic. Go down in history.
Since he really didn't understand how the success was made in the first place, when it turned around, he had no idea how to fix it either.
Sadly, Manny Gerard can only conclude that it was too hard to master.
It is the nature of companies that nothing grows straight lines to the moon. The mark of a great management is not managing the upside. Everybody manages the upside well. It's managing the downside, and very few people manage the downside well.
No one was ever able to cut overhead enough to survive.
You've got to really go and not cut costs 15%. You've got to cut costs 45%. Emotionally, it's impossible to do.
Yeah, I'm not envious of Ray Kassar's position in that thing.
1982 was the perfect representation of a nightmare.
It's coming and they say, okay, it looks like this, and you come in 2 weeks later, and as I said earlier, it's down 10%, and 2 weeks later, it's down another 10%, and it was just chaos. There was no fixed point that stayed solid for more than 10 minutes.
Atari had a fate that no one from the inside could actually see or avoid.
The fact is, the industry, which had grown like a rocket, fell back dramatically, but the basic business didn't go away.
Atari's legacy exists on several levels.
The people at Atari contributed dramatically to shape the digital revolution of the 8-bit generation.
People like to tell me the story about the first time they saw a Pong. They like to tell me the stories about how they met their husband or their wife playing Pong. People like to tell me how excited they were when they got the 2600 under the Christmas tree, how it was the most important thing that happened in their childhood, things like that. And it's gratifying, it's fun.
Atari was also the testbed for companies based on creativity and technology alike.
The environment there was unique in the freedom they gave us to be creative, to try different things, because we were doing things no one else had done before. And To this day, it remains the single most talented collection of individuals I've ever worked with.
Nolan Bushnell started the Aquarian business style that rules Silicon Valley to this day. But more than that, he introduced people, all kinds of people, well-educated college professors, working class folk, and legions of kids to the upcoming digital world.
You ready to go?
For some reason that I don't quite understand is that I have been able to be a business chameleon. That is, if I'm dropped in a pond of marketing guys, I can talk marketing. If I'm dropped in a pond of engineers, I can talk engineering. You know, people call me a visionary, but I'm not really sure what that means.
The Atari ride stands as one of the most unforgettable experiences for anyone who was involved.
The Atari experience for me, good and bad, is not an experience I would trade. It was a great education. It was one of the great rides up, and as we all know, one of the great rides down. Trust me, up is more fun.